Hey guys, this is Charles with PremiumBeat, and in this video we're going to learn how to create some retro horror movie titles in After Effects. And to do this we're going to use a free plugin and some free assets. Let's go ahead and preview the effect. Alright guys, as I mentioned, we're going to create this effect with some free assets and a free After Effects plugin. And the plugin you're going to need is Saber from Video Copilot. This plugin is going to allow us to create some awesome glow effects on our title text. We're also going to use some other free assets like film grain and some sound effects, and you can get those from the project file, which you can download on PremiumBeat, and I'll have a link for the blog post in the description of this video. Alright guys, let's jump over to After Effects and get started. Alright, let's create a new composition. And I'm just gonna have this be a 1920 by 1080 comp at 24 frames per second. I'll just call this main comp. And for the duration, I'm gonna have it be 20 seconds long. And go ahead and click OK. Now we can go ahead and create our actual text title. So I'm just gonna select the text tool here and go ahead and create some titles. The font that I'm using is called Bevan, and it's available from Google Fonts. I'll have a link for that on the blog post. And I'm just gonna speed up me formatting kind of the shape and size of this text so the title looks a little bit nicer. All right guys, I've got my titles kind of formatted and set up. Again, feel free to use your own creativity on how you want to actually design the shape of your titles and whatever font you want to use. In this case, I made some of the letters a little bit bigger on the ends here, kind of similar to something you might see like on the Stranger Things title. And the Ozark Howler, that is a mythical beast or kind of cryptid myth that supposedly lives around the Ozarks where I live. So feel free to name your movie title after whatever kind of creature lives in your area there. And now let's go ahead and add in a solid that we're gonna apply the Saber plugin to. So I'm just gonna right click here and do a new solid. We'll just call this Saber. Make it comp size. The color doesn't really matter here. Go ahead and click OK. And with that selected, let's go ahead and apply Video Copilot Saber. So under Effect, Video Copilot, and Saber. And the first thing we need to navigate to is the Customize Core. So go ahead and check that down. And core type, we're gonna change this to be a text layer. And then for the text layer, let's go ahead and select our titles. Now we're gonna see everything has been blown out quite a bit. A nice starting point that I like to start at is the presets up here. I'm gonna select the neon preset. And it's still a little bit too blown out, so let's go over to the glow intensity. And I'm gonna dial this down to something like 16. So now we can start to see this take shape. I'm gonna zoom in here so I can just see the glowing in the core a little bit easier. And I'm gonna change the glow color here to be more of like a green color tone. Something kind of like that for now. Again, we can always go back and tweak this as much as we want to. And I'm gonna make a few other adjustments here on the glow spread, bias, and core size. So for the glow spread, I'm actually gonna dial this down quite a bit to 0.04. So it's really kind of brought in tight there for that neon look. And for the glow bias, for now I'm gonna set this on 0.35. And then for the core size, right now it's a little bit too big. It's kind of blending together in a few places here. So I'm just gonna dial this back to like 1.7. Now one of my favorite settings that we have available in Saber is gonna be the flicker. So let's come down here and toggle down the flicker options here. We can add in some flicker intensity. So I'm gonna set this at 50%. And if we scroll through here, we're gonna see we now kind of get that neon flicker there. I'm gonna really slow this down though, so I'm gonna set the speed to be 1. And then the other option I really like is to turn on this mask randomization. And what that's gonna do is you're gonna see it's gonna affect the different letters individually. And so this looks really cool, kind of a cool like shimmering effect you get on the titles. A few other options that you might wanna adjust are under the render settings here. So I'm gonna toggle this down. These are kind of a few settings you can adjust it, kind of apply to the end of everything. And these are nice options you can kind of experiment with to maybe dial in different looks kind of quickly. For the gamma, I'm gonna crank this up just a little bit to 1.2. For the brightness, I'm gonna crank this down quite a bit because I feel like it's a little too bright right now. Let me set this on something like 0.28. And then for the saturation, I'm gonna leave it at 1 for now. We're gonna come back to that in just a little bit. Now let's go ahead and make a few adjustments to our actual text. We can animate that and it'll actually animate the Saber layer. So if I hit S on the text for scale, you can see I can adjust this and it's actually affecting the actual look of Saber, the size of it there. So we're gonna have these titles kind of come in over about 12 seconds is what I usually do. Come on screen pretty slowly, kind of drawn out like for like a horror movie title. So in the beginning here on the scale, I'm gonna increase this to about 110. I'll just zoom out here so we can kind of see it in perspective with the comp. Let's go ahead and create a keyframe there. And then I'm just gonna have this scaled down all the way up to 12 seconds here. And I'll have it go down to 90%. So we can kind of see, if we just scrub through here, we can kind of see the movement that's gonna be doing. So it'll kind of be scaling in as the letters and everything start to appear. Now something else I wanna do is add a little bit of kind of the wiggle, like the imperfections, like, you know, when titles would be overlaid on animation cells back in the day. A lot of times the placement wouldn't be exactly perfect, so we get a slight wiggle to it, almost kind of like a VHS effect wiggle. So I'm gonna hit P on the keyboard for position with my text there, and I'm gonna hold Alt and click on the stopwatch there for position. I'm just gonna type in wiggle, and then do open parentheses, 2, 2, and then close parentheses. And that's just gonna give us a very subtle wiggle on our text. So if we scroll through, you can see just a slight wiggle there. Just kind of imitating that imperfection for the animation cells. Now let's go back to our saber layer, and now we're gonna do some keyframing here for those titles. So the main thing for the animation here, kind of revealing all of the letters, is gonna be this start offset under the customized core. So you can see if I go ahead and scrub through here, you're gonna see what that's doing. It's kind of revealing the letters. So we're gonna increase this all the way up to 100%, and just do a keyframe here at the very beginning of our composition. And then let's come down here to the 12-second mark. And we're just gonna have this go all the way down to 0. And so now if we scrub through here, we're gonna see, basically we get the reveal of our title. And you can hit U on the keyboard to show those keyframes there if you wanna see those. And the other keyframes I'm gonna add here are totally optional for you. Again, you wanna make them fit your own title, but I'll show you a few other things that I did that I kinda liked. So for the flicker intensity, I'm actually gonna have that slow down a bit. So around the 10-second mark here, I'm gonna come up here to flicker intensity. I'm gonna create a keyframe there on that one at 50%. And by the time it reaches the very end, I'm gonna have this go down to 35%. And then over time, for the glow bias up here, let's go to the very beginning. I'm gonna create a keyframe on that at 0.35, and then all the way at the very end, we're just gonna have this gradually increase to 0.45. So it just adds a little bit more glow to that, kind of progressing through there. And then one thing that I really liked at the very end, like right when the letter's complete, right here at the end, I'm gonna zoom in on this so we can see this close. So right here at the 12-second mark, I'm gonna come down here to the saturation, which is under render settings. And so one keyframe before that, I'm gonna go ahead and keyframe the saturation at 1, and then right when it reaches over here at the 12-second mark, I'm gonna bump this up to 1.5. And it really kind of boosts, you can see the color boost that gives it, so it's right when the letter's all kind of complete. It gives it a nice pop there. Again, this is optional for you on your titles, but I just like the way that looks. Usually you can have like a sound effect or something go off at that same time too. All right, now we can start adding in some imperfections, because right now everything looks a little bit too clean. Doesn't look as retro as we want it to. So what I'm gonna do here is actually, I'm gonna pre-compose the saber and the text layers together. So I'm just gonna hold Shift and select both of those. Come up here to Layer. Let's go down to Pre-compose. We'll just call this our title text pre-comp. And make sure Move All Attributes into a new composition is selected. Go ahead and hit OK. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zoom in here. Let's add a slight blur to this to soften everything up. So with that selected, come to Effect, come down here to Blur, go down to Gaussian Blur, and I'm just gonna set this on 4. So you can see it really softens that up. Again, kind of matching that retro aesthetic. You can click on Repeat Edge Pixels if you want to. Now I wanna add in some chromatic aberration. And we have several options you can do this. You can do this, in a very traditional way in After Effects by making multiple copies of your comp here and setting them to different color channels, and you can kind of offset the scale of them and do tricks like that. Another nice kind of quick way you can do it that's built into After Effects is using the channel blur effect. So with my comp selected here, I'm gonna come here to Effect, and again under Blur, I'm gonna select the channel blur effect. If I come down here and blur the blue channel, you can see we get a little bit of nice kind of color fringing. This is pretty much made up of blue and green here. So if I actually blur the green channel, it's pretty much just gonna blur everything we see. So you have some nice options there depending on whatever color you went with. You can kind of blur this to add a little bit kind of a chromatic effect there on the text. Now I'm actually gonna jump back over to my text title comp here, and I'm gonna go to Saber, and I'm gonna change the color to have a little bit more blue in it so we can see that a little bit easier. Click OK there. And let's go ahead and close that, and back over here. Now we can see more of that kind of blue fringing there with the channel blur. Now I'm actually gonna go ahead and delete the channel blur effect for that. I just wanted to demonstrate that for you guys. To create the chromatic abrasion that I'm gonna add to this text, I'm gonna use another free plugin, which I use this a lot in these tutorials. It's from Plugin Everything, and that is Quick Chromatic Aberration 2. So I'm gonna right click here and do a new adjustment layer. And with that selected, come here to Effect, and just come down here to Plugin Everything and select Quick Chromatic Aberration 2. And let's zoom in here so we can see what's going on. But if we increase the position here, you can see the chromatic effects occurring. I'm just gonna set this on something like 2. So we just get a slight chromatic effect around the edge of the text. Toggle that on and off, you can see that. I might actually bump this to like 2.5. Now, adding into the retro aesthetic even more, something that's gonna look really nice on our glows and stuff, is gonna be adding in some actual real film grain. So I'm gonna come back over here to the project panel here in the assets, and you can download some awesome free film grain overlays from Shutterstock. I'll have one of these in the actual project file, but if you wanna download all of those, I'll have a link where you can download that on the blog post as well. So I'm gonna select this 16mm coarse film grain. I'm just gonna drag and drop it on top of everything here. Let's go ahead and zoom back out. And now we can see the film grain in here. I'm gonna zoom out. It is 4K, so I'm just gonna resize this. With that selected, come here to layer, and you can select, I believe, fit to comp under transform. And I'm gonna set this here. I'm gonna hit F4 to toggle the switches for the blending modes. If you don't see that, I'm gonna set this to be overlay. Now, when you do that, if you are using Quick Chromatic Aberration 2, come back over to that adjustment layer, and there's a setting in here that I always forget to turn off, and that's the unmult setting, so go ahead and check that off, and that will overlay that film grain so it looks correct. When the unmult's selected, it basically gets rid of all the black background, and we don't want that in this case because we're overlaying some film grain. So if we kind of scroll through here, we're gonna see some of the subtlety that film grain adds to the glow, but what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna duplicate the film grain, so I'm gonna select that, hit Control D to duplicate it, and I'm just gonna make multiple copies of this all throughout the timeline so that film grain is over everything. So you may have to duplicate that a few times. Looks like about 4 times here for this composition here that's 20 seconds long. If we get down here at the very end where the glow is a little more prominent, you can really see kind of how that film grain affects the edging on the glow. Go ahead and check that on and off. You can see the difference there. So that definitely adds in some retro vibes. Another thing I like to add in is some kind of white flickering film grain, and I've included a file of that. Here's some retro white film grain that you can use with the project file as well. So I'm just gonna drag that in here and place it atop everything again. And this clip's actually 10 seconds long, so you'll probably just have to use 2 copies of it. So I'm gonna set this to be a screen blending mode. And now we go ahead and scroll through here, you're gonna see kind of that white flickering of that white grain. There's quite a bit on this, kind of an exaggerated effect. I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick RAM preview of this just to kind of see what that looks like. There we can see the actual white film grain. Quite a bit of it there, flickering very quickly. Again, it's kind of a stylized look for this particular title. If you want to dial back how much white grain there is, one easy trick you can do is just hit T on that for the opacity and kind of lower the opacity, and some of the smaller granules there won't show up as prominently, so that kind of dials back how much you can actually see. I'm gonna leave it at 100%, and I'm actually going to duplicate that and just drag a second copy of that over, so it's just covering up the entire kind of composition timeline. All right, now that we've got that stuff set up, we're getting near the end here. Hopefully you guys are still with me. We're gonna do a few extra tricks that I like to do. If you made it this far, congratulations. And let's go down here, let me show you kind of why we pre-comped our text together. This is one thing I really like quite a bit. So we're gonna select our text comp, and we wanna set it to a screen blending mode. And what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna create kind of a ghosting effect around the text here. It's gonna be very subtle, but this goes a long way. It looks really cool, almost kind of gives it more of a 3-dimensional look. So I'm gonna select my text title pre-comp here, and I'm gonna duplicate it once, and on this second copy down here, I'm gonna hit enter. We're gonna rename this Ghost, which is appropriate here for our horror movie titles. And then I'm gonna hit T on the keyboard for opacity, and I'm gonna dial this down to like 10%. And then I'm gonna hit S for scale, and for this, we're gonna scale this down to 95%. And now you can see we're getting kind of this ghost outline, almost like a reflection around our text here. I'm actually gonna dial down the opacity even more because I think it's a little too high, and I might scale it up a little bit more as well. This may differ on your text, kind of what looks best, but let me go back here to the opacity and style this down to 8%. So really faded there. Again, it's gonna be super subtle. And then for scale, I'm gonna have this be like 97%. And then what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna duplicate that ghost composition again. So Control D. And then on that second copy we just did, I'll go back to scale. And let's scale this down to be more like probably 94%. And if we want to, we can lower the opacity on that even more, maybe like 5%. So you can kind of see we're getting this slight ghosting effect around the text. Almost looks like it's an imperfection, maybe with like when it was scanned in on the animation cell. You know, if they put this on like some glass or something when they were creating this. You know you're doing it right if you can't tell if it's an actual imperfection on the video and it's intentional, or if it's just the astigmatism in your own eyes. All right, now let me show you another trick we can do with the hue and saturation effect, actually on our main titles, and you can actually do this on your ghost titles as well if you want. But I'm gonna select my main text pre-comp here, and let's come up here to the 12-second mark. That's right where kind of everything completes there. And what I'm gonna do is with that comp selected, come here to Effect, go down to Color Correction. We're gonna select Hue and Saturation. And what's cool about this is we can just adjust the master hue here, and we can actually change the colors of our text. So if you wanna just quickly preview what your titles might look like with a different color, this is a quick, nice way you can do that. Now, something else we can do is right at the end here of that 12-second mark, let me zoom in here. So basically one keyframe before that. So let's say right when these titles kind of kick on at the end, maybe we want to change the color of this to something more menacing. So I'm going to come over here to our hue and saturation, do a keyframe here on the channel range. And then if we just move over one frame, let's go ahead and change this to be red. Yeah, something kind of like that looks pretty good. Similar to Stranger Things, I suppose. And we can preview what this might look like as that ends there. So let's go ahead and preview this. And now we can see that. And that can be a nice, cool way to do a color change if you want that on your text. Again, just giving you another option there. Something else definitely kind of fun to look at. Let's jump back over to our text title pre-comp, jump in here. Let's select the saber layer, the solid, and you may need to hit F4 there if you don't see the modes. Let's set this to be a screen blending mode. So now you can see our original text underneath that. I'm gonna select the text, and let's dial the opacity of this down quite a bit to like 10%. And this can give us a nice kind of subtle different color there. And you can experiment with this. So let's jump back over to our main comp now. And you can see what that does, just kind of adds a little bit inside the lettering there, kind of fills that in just a little bit more. And if we go to the very beginning, you can kind of see we get a rough outline of our text kind of before it's actually been revealed. So that can be a nice kind of another way you can change things up if you want to. Now, one of the last things I want to show you here is how we can fade the text out kind of in a more natural manner, because like a lot of times with these texts, it won't fade out all at once. It'll kind of fade out from the outside inward, and you want that to look very natural. Let me show you a trick for doing that as well. So let's go back over to our project panel. I'm gonna do a new composition, and I'll just call this fade out. Again, make sure it's the same comp size there. Go ahead and click OK. And let's go ahead and create a new solid. I'll just have it be a white solid, make it comp size, click OK. And on this one, I'm gonna hit F4 here, toggle the switches there. I want this to be 3D. Now let's go ahead and right click, let's do a new point light. So it'll be a point light here, intensity 100%, go ahead and click OK. And you may need to reposition this to be in the center of your comp, but if it's not perfect, that's fine too, because these imperfections work out great for stuff like this. Now I'm gonna hit T there, which will bring up the intensity of the light. And at the very beginning here, let's go ahead and crank this up. The idea here is we want this to basically be all blown out white. So I'm gonna set this to be like 220%. So that's pretty much all blown out there. And I'm gonna do a keyframe there on the intensity. And let's just go down here to 2 seconds and bring this all the way down to 0. So now we have that basically kind of doing exactly what we want, where it's kind of fading outward, inward. And so what we're gonna do now with this, let's come back over to our main comp. And now let's go ahead and select that fade out composition, and you can put it above the grain if you want to, if you want everything to fade out, but I'm actually gonna put it below the film grain there because I actually want that to still stay on screen. So what I'm gonna have happen here is with that layer selected, that fade out layer, because it goes from white to black, we just set this to be a multiply blending mode. So I'm gonna come over here and set it to multiply. You can see what's gonna happen here. So there's our titles, and then they're gonna naturally start to fade out in kind of the manner that we want, kind of outwards, inward. And it just looks a lot more natural there, kind of like the titles would fade out on retro horror movies and stuff like that. All right, guys, I know you thought this tutorial was over. I got one more tip for you here, and that's just for these credit text, how it kind of does that film burn effect where it kind of burns in at a different color. I want to show you guys a quick, easy tip for that. So you can see what I've got here is just these credit text. I've added a glow to it with a fast blur to kind of soften it up. You can kind of see the settings here if you want to log those. And what I've got happening here is I've just keyframed the opacity so it fades in and then it fades back out. But if you notice on a lot of these retro movies or horror movies and stuff, The text will kind of have a little bit of a different color as it kind of fades in and fades back out, almost like kind of like a film burn effect. Let me show you just a quick way you can kind of imitate that. So with my text selected here, we're just gonna come here to Effect, and then under Color Correction, we're gonna select Tint. And on the Map White to, I'm gonna set this to be kind of a dark red color. Something kind of like that. Again, you can use any color you want. And we're gonna keyframe this amount to tint. So I'm gonna come over here and we're gonna have it be right here at about the middle of our opacity, kind of that transition as it kind of fades in. I'm gonna keyframe the amount to tint right there at 100%, so it's fading in red, and then as it reaches, completion there for the opacity fade in, I'm just gonna have this amount to tint go all the way to 0. So if we go ahead and scroll over this, you can kind of see what happens. So it's red, and then it converts back over to that film burn kind of white color, and then we're just gonna do the inverse of that as it fades out. So let's go ahead and keyframe the amount to tint here. So let me hit U here so we can see that. So we have amount to tint. Do a keyframe there, and then as it reaches about the halfway point, we'll have the amount to tint go all the way up to red again. And this is gonna recreate that effect for us where it fades in kind of red and then gets bright white and then fades back out in kind of that red secondary color tone. Again, just a nice way you can recreate that look. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed creating these retro titles. And remember, I'm gonna have links for everything that I mentioned on the blog post over on PremiumBeat. The project file also includes some fun bonus title scenes that you can break down as well. So be sure to check that out. And I will catch you guys on the next one.